So I've got my final interview for Durham next month. Um, I did have the same interview for the same force last year, but since then the CVF has changed. So I'd imagine that there's going to be a bit of a difference in the questions. So I was just after a bit of information, really, just so I know what I can expect.
All right. Okay. So my big question to yourself is, having reflected on failing last year and having maybe you got feedback, depends on the force. Some forces don't give any feedback at all. But having gone through that process, what do you feel let you down?
So I felt caught off guard a little bit. I didn't actually get any feedback, so it's just me speculating. But some of the questions were fairly blunt, and I was expecting some like hard hitting questions, but the bluntness of certain questions just caught us a little bit off guard.
Right. Give me an
So it's just
example
kind
of
of
a give me an example of a blunt question then.
so I can't remember the question word for word, but it was something along the lines of you go into a home and somebody's been sexually assaulted. What would you do?
Okay. All right. I know Durham. I think in the northeast actually. Actually, no. Before I continue, so how you said that was a blunt question? That's a perfectly ordinary question. It's a perfectly normal question to get. So they didn't give you feedback. I think forces let people down a little bit when they don't do that. But I understand it. I get it. They just don't have the time. So what do you think it was? Structure, detail, maybe that you tried to use too many buzzwords. Go on, give me a feel for what you think went wrong.
So I just went a little bit quiet for a moment or two, to be honest, which when I think about it a bit more, I think that's to be expected in certain
That's
interviews.
okay.
But at the time, it was just like trying to think on my feet because I was expecting a question along those lines, but it was just a case where I felt I went a little bit blank. And there were certain things that now I've thought about it, I would answer with that I just didn't think of at the time.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to go into that detail because that might be a bit too much detail. But look, one of the things. Sorry, I'm just going to send this call to voicemail. One of the things that I find, in particular with the northeastern forces over the years, I don't know why it's the northeastern ones, but they can be a little bit. You used the word blunt, just a little bit straight talking. This is the question. Let's have a good answer. Come on, let's have a good answer. I think it was Durham. It's either Durham or Northumbria a while back. I don't know if they still do it. I'm fairly sure it's Durham. Actually started off with, so why you? Why should we employ you as a constable? Which I know that quite a few people got knocked off kilter by that because it's just quite a blunt question. But basically, they're asking, why do you want to be a police officer? So why you? Why should we employ you as a police officer? And they just weren't ready for it. So your question is in particular around the CVF changes. I I would I don't think that's your focus at the moment. It being a bit quiet at the start of an answer, that's fine. I used to appreciate it when people would like spend 5 to 10 seconds thinking about their answer before they gave me something. Because if I asked a question, so can you tell me how you would deal with a scenario where you attended a house for um, a burglary call, and whilst you're in there, the partner of the male who is reporting the burglary takes you to one side and says, "Can you help me, officer? I've just been sexually assaulted by my partner, and I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. He didn't have my permission, and I want to leave, but he's telling me if I leave, then my children are going to get it, and all sorts of threats. If you just dive in." If you just dive in there with an answer, I'm thinking, oh, I'm just getting some pre-prepared stuff here that has just been remembered by rote. So I kind of appreciate it as an interviewer when I get someone who's like, that's an interesting question. Let me just think about that for a moment. And I like that because that's demonstrating that someone's actually working on the answer in their mind. And what I'm going to get is something that's more authentic than you just rattling off some standard rote answer that you've learned, where you talk about, I would listen to her empathetically. I would ask probing questions to find out what had happened. I would deal with the offender in line with force policy, but at the same time demonstrating respect towards him. And just talking about a load of stuff that you do, a load of what, and perhaps a bunch full of phrases from the CVF, I would not be entertained by that, and I'd just listen to you thinking, is he trying to bullshit me or something? So I kind of appreciate that's the first thing. So if you've had that silence at the beginning, if your silence was just filled with your head just going, I don't know what they have to say, I don't know what they have to say, I don't know what they have to say. All right, that's one thing. But your head thinking, how am I going to best structure this answer? What sort of approach am I going to take? What things do I need to include? Yeah, I appreciate that. So let's park that bit. Now, what I focus on before I start thinking about the changes to the CVF is making sure that my answers have got a good structure. That's the first thing. That they've got a good level of detail. So when I rattled off those phrases before, I was talking about what I would do, but not how I would do it. It's the how I want to hear and the why. I want to hear about the how and the why. Isn't that right, Summer? The how and the why. I said why, and she put her head up. I don't know why. Should do that again? Summer. No, she's not even responding to her name. So, yeah, it's the how and why that's important, not just the what. Because if you just talk about the what in your answer, it's meaningless. It's just a load of buzzwords. It's the how and the why. What your rationale is for the approach you're going to take. So, if you're going to talk about questioning someone, I'd want to know how you're going to do it. How exactly are you going to do that? How exactly are you going to listen carefully to what the person has to say? How exactly are you going to make sure they know that you what they're saying has been listened to by you? And how are you going to make sure that you take into account their feelings at the time? How are you going to ensure that you deal with the perpetrator with respect, fairly and responsibly, and without unlawful discrimination, the 4 requirements of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and at the same time demonstrate kindness and compassion, because you don't know what they've gone through in their past life. So that's why I'm going to treat them this way. That's why I'm going to treat the victim in this way. So you've got your rationale, you've got your reason behind it. That's what I'm looking for. Good structure, good detail, authenticity, emotional connect. How are you going to manage your own feelings? Share with you now. You know, when you get a report that a child or a woman has been sexually assaulted, or a man's been sexually assaulted, it's tough. It's tough. It's going to leave an imprint on your mind. So how are you going to manage those feelings? How are you going to manage a scenario where you discover on some call or through your inquiries that are routine for some other reason that maybe an 8-year-old in that family has been sexually molested or even raped by the stepfather? You know, how are you going to, it's all well and good dealing with it, but then there's dealing with it. So how are you going to do that? And then ultimately, making sure you answer the question. So structure, detail, authenticity, emotional connect. Make sure you just answer the question. So sometimes people go off on these right tangents, and they actually answer the question they thought they were going to get asked, as opposed to actually answering the question that got asked. So there's a lot going on there, but those 5 things, they're the 5 things that some of you may have watched my videos before and you're thinking, I've heard you talk about that before. And the reason why I'm talking about it again is because when we run our Academy one-to-ones and our Academy small group webinars, same issues crop up all the time. Same. You know, we practice with people, and when we practice with people, same 5 things all the time. Because it's not a natural way of talking, is it? You know, you don't talk like this on a daily basis. And let me ask you a question, Aaron. How many weeks training did you have at school, college, or university on interview technique? Because
None.
not what you
None.
had none, but no weeks. What about days?
There might have been a few days in like year 10, 11 when I was like 14, 15. Apart from that,
Yeah, exactly when you
like
need
it
it,
was
when you're
like,
14 and 15. Yeah.
yeah.
If you're lucky, because that's all part of the careers thing they have to do to tick the box with Ofsted. I know that because I'm a governor at my little boys' school, and we have to provide careers guidance for 14, 15-year-olds, and we have to show them what it is and how to be interviewed. I actually run that bit, so we do it quite well, but it's too early, it's the wrong time. So it's not your fault, Aaron, and everyone else is thinking, I don't do those 5 things, and I didn't even know I needed to do them. Well, this is what comes from having done this for 30 years. I know that those 5 things are the basic requirements. and it's not your fault if you don't do them, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think schools, colleges and universities fail people because they're not actually preparing them for life after education. And don't even get me on that soapbox of what's the purpose of education. So I know I'm going off at a tangent. So forgive me, I often go off at tangents. Those of you who know me, Daniel might be thinking, yeah, Brendan's going off at tangent. He does that all the time. Aaron, the question you asked was about changes in the CVF. I would less focus on that, and I'd more focus on those 5 things first. Yeah. The changes in the CVF aren't quite as big as what you thought they might be. All right, there's been some changes, but it's mainly in the values. And shall I share a little secret with you that, shall I share a little secret? Yeah, yeah, shall I? Yeah, you'll be more enthusiastic than that. Like, yes, okay. All right. The competences are pretty much the same. The wording has changed a little bit, but they're pretty much the same. What has changed are the values. And the values have now gone from transparency, impartiality, integrity, and public service to courage, respect and empathy, and public service. Public service hasn't changed too much, but what has changed, the big change is in courage. Because we used to have a value called integrity, and some forces still use that, depending on whether they move to the new CVF or not. But the College of Policing, in line with the changes of the Code of Ethics and in line with what society expects from police officers, has changed integrity to courage. And you might be thinking, what's the difference between the two? I know, Aaron, you're saying, I didn't know he was going to go this deep. Like I said, I'm sharing some little secrets from the Academy vaults here. We've been talking actually this morning on one of our team meetings. We were talking about the difference between integrity and courage. And the reason being is the Met Police, this is where it gets even more confusing, don't use the CVF. They use their own values for the final interview. But for the online assessment centre, they use the CVF. I know, confusing. But for the final interview, the Met and Merseyside Police use their own values. Now, the Met have inside their values both integrity and courage. And they'll ask a question on each one of them. And you may be thinking, what's the difference between the two? So actually, we're talking about this as a team this morning. And I think where we're going with it is integrity is the sense of being that you have, your willingness to do the right thing, that you have that as part of who you are, as your honest self. Whereas courage, moral courage, is when you actually step up to the plate and do it. It's very hard to differentiate between the two. So we've actually done a little bit of research today as a team, looking at the old value of integrity and the behaviours expected within it, and the new value of courage and the behaviours expected within it. And the differences are that there's still a requirement to challenge behaviour which undermines the profession and that is inappropriate. But in the new value of courage, it talks about also supporting other people who've done the same. Because one of the problems that I think exists within the police service, and I know some of you heard me talk about this, is that, you know, there's been the likes of Carrick and Cousins and others. You just need to put the words police misconduct and the name of your force into Google, and it'll bring up some horrendous cases of misconduct. And if you follow the timelines back of that misconduct, you'll probably find that there were officers there witnessing some of the misconduct or the impact of the misconduct, and they chose not to say anything. Because if they did say something, one, it was a difficult conversation, and two, I know this because I'm not naive, and I've been in the police service, and I've fought corruption, and I've put my hand up and said this is wrong. I've had one of my police officers sent to prison, and rightly so, but I've had things like grass written on my paycheck. I've been moved to a different division as a troublemaker. You know, I've been through that. I know what it's like. So now what they're saying is, when someone else challenges behaviour, you're required by the competency and values framework, the behaviours we expect, to also support that other person. So there's something that's different, which you could include in your answers. There's something as well about when you do challenge behaviour, that you should also be open and responsive. That's the same as the wording before in integrity, but also now be open to scrutiny. So that's like, all right, so you better be ready for the scrutiny that's going to come next, because you're going to get people saying, yeah, but I've had this when I reported someone for the inappropriate use of force. I had 3 officers gang up on me a week later and say, unless you redact that and say that never happened, because we're all saying nothing happened and you're the only one who's saying the prisoner was punched, unless you say you made a mistake, we're going to say that when we arrested him and there was a bit of a scuffle, that you put the boot in far more than that was needed. So are you going to be open to scrutiny? That's not the question they asked me. Basically, they said, so fucking drop it, mate. Otherwise, you know, it really was. This is what corruption is. So scrutiny. Are you ready for that scrutiny? Are you ready for that scrutiny? And then there's some other big differences where courage requires you to stand up to discrimination and prejudice and hate in all its forms. Far more specific than the old value of integrity. It also requires you to not just address the misconduct, but take action after. Take action after. And engage in the difficult conversations that are going to enable that to happen. So there's a big difference. If you're thinking the new CVF, there's a big difference. And where I know some forces are going at the moment is they're starting to ask more questions which relate to that value of courage. They may not tell you at the start, they may not say this question is based on the value of courage, but they may say something like, so I'd like to imagine you as a police officer in the future, you're in the parade room and you're quietly knuckling down doing some paperwork, and your sergeant comes in and starts making comments directed towards one of your colleagues, which you think is misogynistic and bordering on bullying. What are you going to do? Or can you tell me about a time when you've engaged in a difficult conversation where you've had to challenge and take further action about a colleague or another person's behavior? So I think the questions are going to get tougher. Why? Because we've now got this value of courage. And the value of courage now, I think, reflects what society wants. Because I don't think the problem is necessarily the bad apples in the barrel. Often that analogy is used, you hear it, don't you? Like, oh, it's just 1 or 2 bad apples in the barrel. Yeah, it is. But I think the bigger, wider problem is all the apples around them who didn't do anything when, for example, the murderer of Sarah Everard, I'm not going to use his name, bless his soul, his nickname was the rapist, and no one thought to challenge it. Carrick, the serial rapist from the Met, his nickname was Dave the Bastard. And the Met even put out a press release to say, this didn't mean to say he was a sexual predator, it just meant he was mean and cruel. Oh, that's all right then, is it? He was mean and cruel. Oh, he was mean and cruel. Well, that's okay. You know, so even then they're like messing up the press releases. That one got withdrawn really quickly. So no one challenged that. No sergeant or inspector went, hang on a minute, I've just taken over the shift. And Carrick, his nickname is Dave the Bastard. What's going on there? No one did it. So that's why we've now got this courage value, and that's why the code of ethics has changed as well, because it requires more of you. Is that making sense? Sorry, Aaron probably wasn't expecting this. He was probably thinking, I only asked. But this is the analysis we do, by the way, in case you're thinking, why are they so good at the one-to-ones? Well, we've been doing these one-to-ones. All of us have been doing them for decades now. I choose people in the team who are good at doing one-to-ones, not just because they've been approaching retirement and decided to do a coaching course, but because for like decades within the service, they've been demonstrating those skills already. So we meet regularly to discuss these things so that we're on top of what's going on in terms of what's required nationally, what the state of play is. And we also hear from our covert sources about some of the problems within forces as well. There's a certain firearms team somewhere in the country, I'm not going to mention what force, but oh dear, my goodness, they really need to get a grip of the behaviour of some of the officers in there. Erin, all good?